I was carrying a mug of lukewarm chamomile tea when I first heard it, my children's voices muffled but unmistakably heated, leaking through the half-closed door of my study. It was a Tuesday afternoon, quiet enough that even the refrigerator's hum felt loud, and I'd only gotten up from my recliner to stretch my stiff knees. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. God knows I've never been the type. But when I heard my name spoken like a business term, not a father, my hand froze on the doorknob. Dad's house is the biggest asset, Ethan said, sharp and controlled, like he was cutting into a boardroom presentation. If we don't divide things intelligently, we'll lose half of it to taxes. He's still alive, Daniel muttered, voice trembling with that familiar blend of guilt and frustration. Can you at least acknowledge that? I'm being realistic, Ethan snapped. Someone has to be. Emily? Silence. Then Emily's soft sigh, the one she used when she was trying too hard to stay neutral. I just think we should wait. Dad hasn't even... Oh, come on, Ethan cut her off. You know as well as I do that he's not the same anymore. I let go of the doorknob. The mug slipped slightly in my grip, tea sloshing against the rim. I steadied it, but something inside me, something old and tightly wound, began to shake. They weren't talking about my health. They were talking about my estate, my assets, my things, all spoken about in the past tense as if I'd already gone cold. My first reaction wasn't anger. Not yet. It was the unmistakable sting of betrayal, the kind that hits a man in the chest like a slow, deliberate punch. For a moment I wondered if maybe I'd misheard, if maybe I was being oversensitive. But then, I'm the one who's been managing his finances, Ethan continued. It only makes sense that I handle the house. Daniel can't afford it, and Emily doesn't even live in state. That's not fair, Daniel fired back. You think because you're successful you're entitled to everything. I've been helping Dad too, emotionally. That's not help, Ethan scoffed. That's freeloading. Enough, Emily said sharply. Sharper than I'd heard her in years. This is disgusting. We shouldn't be dividing up Dad's life like he's dead, Ethan finished. We have to be adults about this. Something in me cracked, then not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way ice fractures under snow. Dead. They said it so easily. I stepped back from the door. My heart wasn't racing. It was something worse, steady, cold, deliberate. I've been a calm man my whole life. 42 years as a high school history teacher, retired now, will teach you to keep the fire inside from spilling into the classroom. I've lost a wife to cancer, survived a messy divorce before that, paid my mortgage with the salary of a man who never chose his profession for the money. I've lived through grief and disappointment, love and pride. I've stood unshaken in storms that would break younger men. But hearing my own children barter over my estate while I still drew breath, that rattled me to the bone. I turned around and walked back down the hallway. Each step felt heavy, as though my body weighed more than it had moments ago. The house felt different, colder, emptier, a museum of moments no longer shared. The wedding photo of Linda and me on the mantel. The framed macaroni art Emily made me when she was 6. The patched-up leather armchair where I used to read to the boys. These were pieces of a life I thought I'd given my children with love. Now they were discussing how best to divide it. I set my mug down on the kitchen counter. My hands were trembling, but my jaw was set. A quiet kind of fury began warming the edges of my shock. I wasn't afraid of dying. I'd made peace with mortality long ago. But the idea of being erased before I was ready, that didn't sit right. I'd underestimated the distance that had grown between my children and me. Maybe I'd ignored it. Maybe I'd hoped our family fractures would heal on their own. All families have cracks. Some just run deeper than others. Ethan, with his immaculate suits and clipped tone, had always been practical to a fault. He loved me, I knew that, but sometimes he treated love like an item on a checklist, something to schedule between meetings. Daniel, dear boy, had always worn his heart on the outside, sensitive, emotional, struggling, but I had never seen him as a burden, no matter what his older brother said. And Emily, my youngest, had inherited my quiet, steady, empathetic, the one who remembered my birthday every year without needing a calendar reminder. but even she didn't know how to stand firm against her brothers. I leaned both hands on the counter, breathing slowly, carefully, as if the wrong move might shatter what was left of my composure. They thought I didn't hear them. They thought my mind had dulled with age. They thought they could plan my life or the end of it better than I could. Well, they were wrong. I straightened up. The ache in my knees flared, but I ignored it. I'd been passive too long, letting them shape the narrative of who I was now. Fragile, fading out, but I wasn't fading. Not yet. I walked back toward the study. Not to confront them, I wasn't ready for that, but to listen. Not to their words, but to the truth beneath their voices. Fear, greed, desperation, confusion, love, twisted into something unrecognizable. And from that moment, something inside me sharpened. If they believed my life was already a ledger to be settled, then I'd show them something they'd forgotten. I was still here, and I had plans of my own. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the street lamp outside cast its tired glow across the room. Every few minutes I shifted positions, though my old mattress had long ago molded itself into the shape of my body. 17 years that mattress had held me through Linda's illness, through 2 surgeries, through long naps after gardening or teaching, or simply feeling lonely. But that night, the mattress felt foreign, as though even it knew something had changed. I kept hearing their voices. Ethan's certainty, Daniel's hurt, Emily's tension. Not the words exactly, but the tone, the implication. It was near dawn when I finally accepted that sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts were too loud. I sat up with a groan, rubbing my hand over my face. 2-day stubble scratched my palm. "You're getting old, Mike," I muttered. My joints cracked as if to agree. But getting old didn't mean being dismissed, not by my own flesh and blood. I shuffled to the kitchen, brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and sat at the table with my hands around the hot mug. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock above the fridge, a housewarming gift from my late wife's sister. I stared at that clock like I was waiting for it to offer advice. If only time could talk. It wasn't the first time my kids had fought. Far from it. They'd been at each other's throats since the moment they realized they didn't have to share toys. I remembered the first major fight they'd had. Ethan was 10, Daniel was 6, Emily barely 3. Ethan had built an elaborate fort out of couch cushions in the living room. Daniel, curious and impulsive even then, had tried to help. Help in his mind meant jumping directly into the structure like a superhero. The whole thing collapsed. Ethan called Daniel a destructive troll. Daniel burst into tears. Emily wandered in holding her stuffed bear and said, "Fort gone?" in the saddest voice known to mankind. I mediated. I always mediated. Linda used to say I was the family's quiet glue, holding everything together with patience, a steady voice, and a long fuse. She wasn't wrong. But after she died, that glue thinned. I stretched myself trying to fill the space she left behind. I worked too much. I came home exhausted. The kids grew older, more complicated, more opinionated. Parenting teenagers is a war of attrition love mixed with landmines. Ethan grew ambitious early. He liked control, precision. He color-coded his homework folders at age 12. He loved me, but he worshipped success. As an adult, he flew too close to the corporate sun, burning himself and everyone near him with that intensity. Sometimes I wondered if he ever let himself breathe. Daniel was the opposite, my emotional compass, always pointing toward some new passion. Music, then painting, then carpentry, then writing. But none of it stuck long enough to stabilize him. He felt deeply, sometimes destructively, deeply. Money slipped through his fingers like water. Still, he showed up on my doorstep more than the others. He brought takeout. He checked the smoke alarms. He cried when he talked about his mistakes. And Emily, my steady girl. She grew up watching everyone else's storms and learned to weather her own in silence, kind, observant, reliable to a fault. She always tried to mediate between her brothers, just like I once had. She carried everyone's burdens without complaint. It scared me sometimes how much she held in. They weren't bad kids. They were human, messy, flawed, trying their best within the confines of their own wounds. Still, overhearing them talk about my estate as if they were selecting items from a catalogue, that cut deeper than anything before. Later that afternoon, after hours spent moving between pacing, cleaning, and staring out the window like a man waiting for a message from the universe, I went into my study. My old oak desk sat in the corner, polished by decades of elbows, papers, and coffee mugs. I pulled open the bottom drawer and took out my file folder labeled Important. Inside were the essentials: the deed to the house, bank statements, tax records, insurance forms. My will dated 8 years ago. 8 years. Back when we were still a functioning family. Back when we took yearly vacations to Lakeview Cabin. Back when Thanksgiving dinners didn't feel like corporate negotiations. Back when I believed my children cared more about being together than dividing things apart. I flipped through the papers slowly. My stomach tightened. I hadn't realized how much had changed since I'd last looked at these documents. Ethan had not only taken the lead in helping with my finances, he'd inserted himself into the narrative so smoothly and confidently that I hadn't questioned it. But one folded document stopped me cold. A printout of an email thread. Subject: Dad's financial readiness. My chest tightened as I read down the page. Ethan had been emailing a financial advisor about anticipated assets, about projected liquidation timelines, about succession planning. Succession. As if I were the CEO of some corporation and not his aging, lonely father who still used paper calendars. But what hit me hardest wasn't Ethan. It was Emily's short reply buried deeper in the thread. Maybe we should talk to Dad directly. I don't feel right about this. And Ethan's response: he'll get agitated. It's better if we handle things for him. For him. As though I were a burden, a responsibility, a problem to solve. I set the papers down and leaned back in my chair. A long breath escaped me, one that seemed to empty out 30 years of fatherhood. I wasn't angry at them for planning. Death comes for everyone eventually. I wasn't blind to that. But planning without me assuming my consent, my incapacity, my irrelevance, that felt like erasure. My hands curled into fists. My pulse steadied into something sharp and decisive. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about dignity, about the quiet autonomy of a man who had spent his life giving more than he ever asked for in return. And I realized then, with a clarity I hadn't felt in months, my children needed reminding that I was still here. Not a sum, not a will, not a declining liability. I was still alive, and I would decide what happened to what I'd built. The idea for my plan didn't form instantly. It simmered, shapeless but electric, gathering weight as I stared at the papers. But I knew one thing. Whatever came next wouldn't be passive. I rose slowly, joints creaking but spirit firmer than it had been in years. My life wasn't over, and neither was my authority. I didn't finalize the plan on the first day, or even the second. No, that would have been too impulsive, and I've never been a man driven by impulse. My life as a teacher taught me patience. 42 years of teenagers with their tempers, hormones, and half-baked excuses will do that to a man. And besides, this wasn't something I could afford to get wrong. The stakes were too high. My children's hearts hung in the balance, even if they didn't know it yet. Still, the idea started to take shape like a slow sunrise. First faint, then warming, then unmistakable. A test not of loyalty, but of character. Not to punish, but to reveal. Not to shame, but to guide. And maybe, if the universe didn't mind giving an old man one last miracle, a chance to pull my children back from the cliffs they'd wandered toward. But before I settled on anything, I needed to see who they'd become. Not from the distance of a father watching his children lead their separate adult lives, but up close, deliberately, with clear eyes. I'd spent too many years retreating into silence after Linda died, letting grief turn me into a passive observer instead of the steady presence I used to be. Not anymore. The first child I called was Daniel. Not because he was younger or more fragile, though both were true. I called him because he was the one most likely to show up without asking why. "Hey, Dad," he answered, voice groggy, even though it was past noon. "Everything okay?" "Need a hand with something in the garage," I lied. Oh, he paused. Yeah, yeah. I can be there in 20 or so. You good? Good enough, I said, and hung up before he could ask more. 25 minutes later, Daniel's beat-up sedan screeched into the driveway. The front left headlight was held in place with tape, and the bumper looked like it had survived a minor war. He stepped out wearing a wrinkled flannel shirt and jeans with paint stains. His hair was too long, his beard uneven. He looked like he tried to take care of himself, but the world always managed to wear him down a little faster than he could patch himself back up. Hey, Dad. He hugged me without hesitation, arms strong around my shoulders. You okay? You sounded weird on the phone. I'm fine, I said, patting his back. Just needed a little help moving some boxes. He nodded, but I saw it. The flicker of worry behind his eyes. The same look he had when he was a boy and thought I was disappointed in him. He followed me to the garage where 3 dusty boxes sat stacked near the workbench. I didn't need help moving anything. I needed time, observation, presence. We carried the boxes inside and sorted through old high school yearbooks, tax records, yellowing letters from Linda. I watched Daniel out of the corner of my eye, the way his hands lingered on photos, the way he hesitated before making decisions, the way guilt hovered around his shoulders like a familiar coat. He wasn't greedy, he wasn't calculating, he wasn't perfect, but he cared, and not in the shallow way caring can sometimes look, but in that deep, bruised, desperate way of someone who thinks they're always one misstep away from disappointing the whole world. He would never betray me, but he would fail himself, if not guided. When we finished, I invited him to stay for dinner. He did, of course. Daniel always stayed if it meant avoiding silence in his empty apartment. We talked about his gig jobs, his failed relationship, his new attempt at woodworking. He apologized at least 3 times for nothing in particular. When he left, he hugged me tightly. "Love you, Dad," he whispered. "I know," I said softly. "Drive safe." The next day I asked Emily to come by. She arrived precisely on time, hair neatly pinned, clothes crisp, carrying a bag from the bakery I liked. "I got those lemon tarts you love," she said as she stepped inside. They were still warm. She moved through the house with gentle familiarity, but also hesitation, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to step fully into my space anymore. We sat at the kitchen table, crumbs gathering between us, and she asked about my health 3 times in 30 minutes. She wasn't greedy either. But she was worried, too worried. And it wasn't about inheritance, it was about failing to be enough. I'd always known she carried more weight than I'd intended for her. The unofficial peacemaker, the responsible one. Seeing it now, from a clearer angle, broke something inside me. "Emily," I said finally, when her eyes darted nervously to the stack of documents I'd left deliberately on the counter. "You're not responsible for me." Her shoulders fell a little. "I know. I don't want us to fight, or fall apart. You're the one holding us together, Emily. It's a heavy job for a kid." "I'm 35, Dad." "You'll always be my kid." She smiled then. That small, sweet smile that reminded me so much of Linda it hurt. When she left, she kissed my cheek and told me she'd call later. She did too, just like she always did. Ethan was last. Not because I loved him least, but because he was the toughest to read. The one who hid his motives behind professionalism and pride. I invited him over under the pretense of needing his advice about some property tax letters. He showed up in a tailored coat, shoes shined, smelling faintly of cologne that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. "Dad," he said briskly, stepping inside, "you should have told me earlier you had questions. You know I can help you navigate these things." I watched him sort through a small stack of envelopes with the sharp efficiency of a surgeon. He explained things I already knew, using a tone that suggested he believed I understood none of it. "Ethan," I said slowly, "why are you so worried about my finances?" He paused. "Someone has to be. You're not getting any younger. That doesn't mean I'm incapable." He pressed his lips together. "Dad, look, I know these things are uncomfortable to talk about, but it's better if we put plans in place now. That way, Emily doesn't have to stress, and Daniel doesn't get overwhelmed." And there it was, the core of him. He wasn't malicious. He wasn't trying to steal. He simply believed he was the only one sturdy enough to handle everything. Control wasn't greed to him. It was safety. But safety for whom? For me? Or for the image he'd built of himself? When he left, he patted my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Dad. I've got everything in order." That was the moment I decided exactly what my plan would be. Not revenge, not punishment, not spite. A correction, a wake-up call. A mirror held up to each of them so they'd see themselves clearly, not the roles they'd locked themselves into. A test to reveal not just intentions, but hearts. I went into my study that night, turned on the old desk lamp, and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and in slow, careful handwriting, I began drafting the plan that would change everything. I spent 3 full days refining the plan, revising details, crossing out ideas, rewording phrases. Not because I needed the extra time, but because I needed certainty. At 69 years old, you start measuring decisions the same way you measure steps on a staircase. Carefully, deliberately, and with respect for what a single miscalculation can cost. In the end, my plan had 3 parts. Part 1. A staged announcement that I would be liquidating almost everything I owned. Part 2. A set of 3 assignments given to each of my children, tasks that would reveal whether they valued me or my assets more. Part 3. A truth they did not expect. But none of it mattered until I gathered them together. So I invited them for dinner. A family meeting, I wrote in the group text. A phrase guaranteed to generate 3 different anxieties. Daniel was the first to respond. "Are you okay, Dad? Need anything?" Emily followed. "I'll be there. Just tell me what time." Ethan responded an hour later, after business hours, with a simple, "I'll rearrange things. See you then." That alone told me everything I needed to know. They arrived on Saturday at 6, all 3 stepping into my home with different energies. Daniel looked nervous, rubbing his palm over his jeans. Emily looked like she'd rehearsed steady breathing all the way over. Ethan looked impatient before he even took off his coat. I served them dinner meatloaf, mashed potatoes, the same meal I'd made them 100 times when they were kids. The silence at the table felt thick, heavy, with unspoken worry. It wasn't until after dessert that I cleared my throat. "All right," I said. "Let's talk." All eyes turned to me. I stood, though my knees complained. Sometimes authority needs posture. "I'm rewriting my will." Emily inhaled sharply. Daniel's eyebrows rose. Ethan leaned back, expression unreadable. "I've decided," I continued, "to liquidate most of my assets." "What?" Daniel blurted. "Dad, why? That's your decision," Ethan said carefully. "But you should really consult." "I'm not finished," I said, sharper than I intended. "Sit." Daniel sank back. Emily froze. Ethan's mouth tightened. "I'm going to donate the majority of it." That got them. Daniel blinked rapidly. "Donate? To who?" "A charity," I said, folding my hands in front of me. "Or several. I haven't decided." "You can't be serious," Ethan said, finally showing some emotion. "Dad, you've worked your entire life for what you have. You're just going to give it away?" "My assets," I corrected. "My decision." Emily swallowed hard. "Dad, are you sure this isn't too sudden?" "No," I said. "It's not sudden. If anything, it's long overdue." They exchanged glances, those silent, complicated glances siblings share when they're trying to solve a puzzle in real time. "So what does this mean for us?" Daniel asked quietly. "Do we get anything?" "Not unless you earn it." Ethan scoffed. Emily's eyes widened. Daniel looked as if I'd slapped him. "Earn it?" Ethan echoed. "Dad, this isn't a job interview." "No," I said. "It's a test, 3 of them." They stiffened as though bracing for impact. "You each have 1 task," I told them. "Complete them, and I'll know what to do with what's left. Fail, and the decision stands." "What tasks?" Emily whispered. I picked up 3 envelopes from the table. Their names were written in my handwriting. "Take them," I said. They did. "Open them." Daniel opened his first, hands shaking. He read silently, then looked at me with wet eyes. "You want me to help repair the old community center?" I nodded. "You always said you wanted to do something that mattered. They need volunteers. Show up for them, not for money. Not for me, for the world. He nodded slowly, lip trembling. Emily opened hers next. Her reaction was different. She blinked, stunned. You want me to take a month off work? Yes. I can't. I have responsibilities. Deadlines. You need rest, Emily. You've been carrying this family on your back for years. This task is simple. Put yourself first for once. Do something for you. She looked down at the paper again, and I saw the fear in her eyes, fear of what would happen if she stopped holding everything together. Ethan opened his last. His jaw tightened. You want me to spend 2 hours a week with you, he said flatly. Doing nothing. Not nothing, I corrected. Talking, being present, no phone, no laptop, just time, with your father. Ethan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Dad, you don't need tests. You need a competent executor. So that's your role? I asked quietly. Executor? No, he said quickly. That's not what I meant. Then say what you mean. His silence told me everything he couldn't. This was the moment. The fight had been simmering since the day I heard them through the study door. And now the pressure finally broke. This is ridiculous, Ethan said. You're manipulating us. I'm teaching you, I replied, because somewhere along the way, I stopped. You think making us jump through hoops is going to fix anything? No, I said, feeling my voice rise, but pretending everything is fine certainly won't. Dad! Emily reached for my hand. I pulled it away, not in anger, in necessity. You three planned my future, I said, turning to each of them. Without me. You decided who I was, what I needed, what I couldn't do. You talked about my home, my things, my life as if I wasn't still living it. Daniel's face crumpled. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Ethan clenched his jaw so hard I saw the muscle twitch. I love you, I said. More than you know. But I will not be erased. The silence after that was suffocating. Then Daniel broke first. Dad, he whispered. We're sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't know you heard us. I wish I hadn't, I admitted. But I did. Emily stood, tears spilling over. We didn't want to hurt you. We were scared. You've been different since she passed. We didn't know how to help you, or each other. Ethan didn't cry. He rarely did. But his voice cracked when he finally spoke. Dad, I wasn't trying to take anything from you. I thought if I controlled the situation, none of us would fall apart. You already have, I said gently. All of you. And so have I. Emily covered her mouth, sobbing. Daniel wiped his face. Ethan looked away. I stood slowly, my spine aching, but my voice steady. Complete your tasks, not for money, not for the will, for yourselves, and for this family. And if we don't? Ethan asked, voice barely above a whisper. Then I'll donate everything, I said softly. Every last piece of it. The words hung there, heavy, final, transformative. When they finally left, the house felt simultaneously too quiet and deeply alive, like the aftermath of a storm that had shaken the old walls awake. I sank into my chair, exhausted, not weak, just tired from fighting for something worth keeping. But I knew this wasn't the end. The real test hadn't even begun. I barely slept that night, not because of the storm outside, but because of the storm I felt inside. The strange blend of freedom, fear, sadness, and something that felt dangerously close to peace. I kept replaying everything that had happened. The clean desk, the empty drawers, the photo, Will's reaction, the way his voice changed when he finally realized I wasn't bluffing. For so long I had believed that the only way to keep my family together was to keep giving, keep absorbing, keep forgiving, keep being the sturdy one, the reliable one, the one who could handle being bruised because I would never break. But somewhere along this journey I finally understood what no one teaches you as a girl, growing up in a fractured family. Strength isn't proven by how much you can carry. Sometimes it's proven by what you finally decide to set down. The morning after my resignation, the city felt surreal. I walked through downtown as though the pavement were softer, the air lighter. The buildings seemed less oppressive. less like looming reminders of my brother and the legacy we had once been pressured to uphold together. My phone buzzed more times before 9 a.m. than it usually did in a week. Texts from Dad. We need to discuss what you're doing. Then, come back for one meeting. It'll calm things down. And finally, you're being impulsive. Texts from Mom. I know you're emotional, sweetie. Please don't make a scene. As if my sanity were the problem. As if quitting the company I practically bled for was a tantrum. As if surviving years of manipulation and gaslighting somehow made me too emotional to make a rational decision. But the messages that hurt the most came from Will. He didn't apologize, not outright, but he tried something worse. He minimized. I didn't mean it like that. You're taking this too far. I was just frustrated. You know how I get. We're family. You don't quit family. I stared at the screens until my vision blurred. For every sentence, I typed a response and then deleted it. Not because I didn't have words, I had too many, but because nothing I said would change him. People don't transform simply because you explain your pain in the right vocabulary. They transform only when they want to, and Will did not want to. So I didn't reply. I silenced the conversation and placed my phone face down on the table. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like an answer, not avoidance. By noon, I was sitting in the small cafe 2 blocks from my apartment. Same corner table, same view of the street, same soft music humming in the background. I had avoided this place for months because it felt too gentle for the version of me I had been. The one constantly rushing, negotiating, salvaging, repairing. Today I needed something gentle. The barista, a girl with a messy bun and constellation-like freckles, looked up and smiled. You haven't been around in forever. I'm trying to fix that, I said. It felt good saying it out loud, even if she didn't understand the weight behind it. When she set down my cup, the foam art was shaped like a leaf, delicate, unfurling, unapologetically reaching upward. A ridiculous thing to cry over, maybe. But that tiny leaf broke me open in the sweetest way, because I realized right there, staring at a cappuccino, that I had been surviving so long that I had forgotten what living felt like. That afternoon, I had my first appointment with a therapist. I had booked the session on impulse the night before, right after leaving the office for the last time. I almost canceled twice. I told myself I was overreacting, that therapy was for people with real problems. Then I remembered the way Will grabbed my wrist, the way my mother told me to be quiet so I wouldn't upset him, the way my father always assumed I would fill in the gaps that my brother created, and I didn't cancel. The therapist, a calm, observant woman with silver streaks in her hair, asked me what I wanted out of therapy. I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out. For years I could detail every quarterly projection, every operational breakdown, every crisis at the office, every weakness in the supply chain. But when asked what I wanted, I didn't have the vocabulary. So I told her the truth. I want to stop feeling responsible for every broken thing around me. She nodded, as though this was not an unreasonable wish at all. And what else? I swallowed hard. I want to feel like my life belongs to me. Her smile was small but warm. It does. We just have to help you reclaim it. Reclaim it. Not start over. Not destroy everything. Not run away. Reclaim. The word felt like a hand extended, not a demand placed. That evening I did something else I had been avoiding. I went home early and cooked for myself. Not because someone else needed to be fed. Not because I had to rush before logging on to check company emails. Not because I had a family obligation, or a deadline, or an apology to craft on behalf of someone else. Just because I deserved care that wasn't contingent on utility. I put on music. I danced barefoot in the kitchen. I burned the first batch of garlic and laughed instead of cursing. I sat at my tiny counter with a bowl of pasta and realized something that made my chest ache in a strange, beautiful way. I wasn't lonely. I was alone. And those are not the same thing. Loneliness is when you crave someone to take care of you. Aloneness is when you learn you can take care of yourself. The next morning my phone buzzed again. Only one message this time, from Will. A single line. So this is it, then? I took a breath, steady and unshaken. Yes. I hit send. Then I blocked the number, not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. Not every wound needs a conversation. Not every ending needs closure. Not every story with your family needs to be rewritten until they approve of the final draft. Some chapters end because you choose to walk off the page. As I got ready for bed that night, I finally understood something that had eluded me my entire life. Letting go wasn't the hard part. Believing I had the right to let go. That was the battle. And now that I had done it once, I knew I could do it again. Not recklessly, not defensively, but intentionally, with clarity, with boundaries, with the strength I never realized I had because I'd been too busy lending it to everyone else. I don't know exactly what comes next for me. A new job, a quieter life, maybe even a future where my family and I rebuild something healthier from scratch. But what I do know is this. The girl who walked into that office every day believing she owed everyone everything, she's gone. And the woman who walked out, she's just beginning.